Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be diving into ValleyCon 2024 and talking about the domination that Windriders had at the tournament. And guys, I've been saying this for a while, but I will continue to say it. Windriders are on the rise. We are going to see more of them in competitive play going forward. We have already seen several lists do very well with Windriders in them. And the list that I'm going to discuss today didn't just have one unit of Windriders, but was a full-blown Saim Hann war host, which was really awesome to see. And I also really like it when themed lists, basically prove the naysayers wrong and do well in a tournament or, other competitive setting, where a lot of players might look at a list like that and be like, oh, well, that will never compete well in competitive play. And then it's run by a really good player. The list smashes at the tournament, completely dominates it, and it causes a lot of players to rethink their past assumptions. And that is exactly what we have here. All right, so what are we going to be looking at in today's video? So first of all, we are going to look at the tournament in which this list did really well in. We're going to be doing a review and analysis of the winning list, and we're going to look at what this means for Windriders going forward in competitive play. All right, so let's take a look at the tournament itself. This was ValleyCon 2024, had 37 players in it and 5 rounds total, which does qualify as a GT. It's on the lower end as far as player numbers, but still, even so, very, decent sized tournament. And it took place at Upper Hutt, Wellington in New Zealand on April 26th. So first and foremost, congratulations to Shane Rongonui for winning 4th place with his Saim Hann army. Yes, it didn't win first, but my God, going 4-1 against some really stiff competition has to be celebrated. And let's go ahead and take a look at the list. So a quick overview of it. It did have an Autarch Skyrunner in it, which was absolutely awesome seeing this guy in there because, we all talk trash about the Autarch Skyrunner, but, you had to keep in theme. So it was really cool to see him. We have 2 Farseer Skyrunners, 1 Warlock Skyrunner, 3 Shining Spears, which again, big surprise, but got to keep in theme, got to have those Shining Spears in there, 3 units of 3 Shroud Runners, 3 units of 9 Windriders, 3 Hornets, and 3 Vipers. So looking at a more in-depth view of the list itself and kind of the different war gear and weapon options that those units had, this is going to be a 2,000 point Aeldari strike force. For the characters, we have an Autarch Skyrunner. He was armed with the Laser Lance and, of course, the Phoenix Gem. And I think, honestly, Phoenix Gem, still worth it. And I think this was actually before the nerf, if I'm not mistaken. But even so, Phoenix Gem, really very good on an Autarch Skyrunner, who is already a little bit tougher than the Autarch on foot, having both an additional wound and toughness 4. We also have the Farseer Skyrunner with the Weeping Stones, and this is a really good tech because if you're running huge units of Windriders, they're going to be picking up units left and right, so having something in there with a Weeping Stone can allow you to pick up extra fate dice. And this is going to synergize perfectly with the fact that this list also, again, has 3 Vipers and 3 Hornets with Bright Lances. There's a lot of Bright Lances out there that could really benefit from those fate dice. The unit is also big enough where you could also split fire, kill 2 different units, and farm 2 fate dice a turn if you're crafty enough. We do have an additional Farseer Skyrunner as well at 90 points, just, without enhancements. But, of course, that's still great. Eldritch Storm's perfect. Having an extra guide in your pocket is really strong as well. We do have a Warlock Skyrunner to join one of the groups of Windriders. Basically, being able to ignore cover on something or conceal something so that it's a little bit tougher to hit is very strong as well and well worth the 55 points on a max size unit. As for the other data sheets in the list, we have 3 Hornets. Now, the Hornets are a really good choice in this list, I think, not only because they're, in theme, but this list is pure Alpha Strike. It goes hard 100% of the time, all the time, and you don't want any extra survivability stuff, really. You just want to go straight damage, and I think Hornets really do just fit the bill there. Being able to deal mortal wounds to units they move over is very strong. So if you need to kill something really badly that maybe your Windriders aren't in a position to, Hornets can easily take care of that for you. The Hornets also are packing 2 Bright Lances apiece, which is very strong anti-large tech. You know, if you notice, this list doesn't have any Skyweavers in it or anything like that, so it doesn't have that Haywire, so it needs something for anti-large, and, you know, this is the answer to any kind of problem that Shuriken Cannons can't deal with alone. Now, we also have a unit of Shining Spears in this list. Now, I do want to mention this a little bit, and I'm not going to just brush this off like, oh, this was just an in-theme pick. That's the only reason why this was selected for this list. No, actually, I think in this list, this unit has a very viable role to play. And this can be missed initially, but it's extremely apparent when you look at the rules that the weapons themselves on the Shining Spears have. So if you guys don't know, all of the laser lances have the assault keyword, and so do the Shuriken catapults. Now, the first thing you'll notice about this loadout is that the Exarch actually is carrying a twin Shuriken catapult instead of the cannon. Now, 9 times out of 10, I don't know about you guys, but I usually arm my Exarch with the cannon. And the reason why this actually got me thinking about the, benefits of running a Shuriken catapult instead is because the Laser Lance and the Star Lance have the assault keyword, and a lot of the times when I'm playing my Shining Spears, they're simply out of range. Even when they move, they're still out of range to shoot because of that really low range on the Laser Lances. But if you are able to advance with these guys, you get a number of benefits. The first thing you get is the ability to fire all of your assault weapons, right? So you can fire all of your assault weapons in the unit, and you don't need to forgo the Shuriken Cannon shots. You can still get some firepower out of the Exarch, and you can kind of feel good about advancing. The second thing is that when you advance with Shining Spears, they actually get a 4+ invulnerable save, which might not seem like that big of a deal, but on a unit that has, 2 wounds each, Exarch has 3, you're probably going to see some plasma fire going towards these guys. You're probably going to see some higher AP trying to take these guys out. And between their -1 to hit naturally and the 4+ invulnerable save that they get, they can be pretty durable. Again, not super durable, but if you're able to make your opponent waste more shots than they wanted to on them, that is going to be a success. That's less shots that they have going towards your other units in the army. And your opponent can't really just ignore these guys, right? They do have to be taken out, because if they're completely ignored, then they're going to get behind enemy lines and they're going to start wrecking havoc on your opponent's more fragile support pieces in the backfield. And the other thing about this unit is that it can be used as a counterpuncher, right? A lot of the times we see counterpunch units in other Eldar lists, like Harlequins with the Vizarch maybe, or maybe Yvraine with, a huge unit of Quins. But in a list like this, it does need some combat, and I think Shining Spears really do fill that role quite nicely. So yeah, while they're not the most competitive unit out there, I really like how Shane inserted these guys and made them work in his list. The next part of the list involves 3 units of Shroudrunners, which are excellent with Windriders. I mean, they're probably the best synergy in the entire index. Giving something that has a massive amount of shots and sustained hits, lethal hits on top of that, is absolutely brutal. And keep in mind that this list has 3 units of 9 Windriders. That's 27 Windriders in it, and you have 3 units of Shrouds to back them up. So basically anything your opponent puts in the midfield on an objective is going to be very gonzo very quickly. Shroudrunners are also great at scoring secondary objectives. I personally love them for this. You can fire and fade them into the enemy deployment zone. You can scout move and then move forward to deploy teleport homers. There's a lot that you can do with Shroudrunners. They're very versatile. You can use them to screen because they're just cheap enough and they have large enough bases to where that's actually viable. And lastly, don't underestimate the fact that they do have precision weapons. So, it's not likely to happen, but a couple of sniper rifles, 3 sniper rifles can in fact take out Imperial Guard officers and things like that and start to dismantle your opponent's buffs. Again, it's not 100% guaranteed. It's not like charging a solitaire in there, but at the same time, if your Shroudrunners, shooting at the unit and they're dealing some damage, they're also blocking another unit off and maybe marking another target. If they die at the end of the turn, the end of your opponent's turn, it's okay because they've definitely made their points back. And hey, you might even have the chance of killing a character while you're at it. Speaking of support, we have 3 Vipers. Now, the Viper is a unit that I've never thought was that bad. The reason why I think a lot of people don't think it's competitive is because it is 85 points. It's a little bit point intensive for the kind of damage and durability it has, but it's excellent in this list because, again, it's taking cover away from enemy units. If your opponent wants to pop smoke, that's all of a sudden not really an option. And again, the AP -1 on the shuriken cannons is going to really come in handy, right? Even against big stuff like Land Raiders. A lot of the reason why Land Raiders are so tough is because not only are they, T12 and they have a lot of wounds and they have a 2+ armor save, but they have the smoke keyword. So oftentimes what will happen is, they'll pop smoke and then they'll use Armor of Contempt and stuff like that. And if you have the ability to remove their cover, that's a stratagem they're not going to be able to use. And if they want to use Armor of Contempt, they're not going to be able to use it in other places on the battlefield. And you have 3 of these things in the list. So not just 1 Viper, but 3. So you're taking cover away from 3 units potentially. And again, that really synergizes super well with the Windriders, who are just able to just absolutely dumpster any unit that's going to be on an objective. Because remember, keep in mind that Windriders reroll all of their hit rolls against units on objectives. Now, the other thing about Vipers, it's kind of a hidden strength, but they're actually pretty good at scoring secondary objectives as well. People don't think about it, but they do have assault weapons, right? The shuriken catapults are, assault weapons. You're not going to be shooting them that often. So, they're good for scoring objectives and things like that. The other thing is they're another Bright Lance, right? So they can, in fact, contribute some damage to large targets. Bright Lances are nothing to scoff at. I know it's just 1. I know they're 85 points, but in this particular list, you're using them for much more than just a Bright Lance platform. And I think that's what a lot of people get twisted sometimes about Vipers, is that, why would I pay 85 points for just 1 Bright Lance when I can pay 100 points or 110 points for 2 of them? And in most cases, in most, balanced competitive lists, that's honestly a good point. But in this particular list, because it does revolve around taking as much durability away from your opponent as possible, and because it doesn't have the benefit of units like Swooping Hawks or Warp Spiders that can easily pick up those secondary objectives for you, you're going to need some additional units that can also pick up those secondaries when they arrive. And the Vipers are pretty good at doing this, as, that's their secondary role, essentially, is being able to score secondary objectives. So yeah, I really do like the inclusion of Vipers in this list because not only does it synergize beautifully with the rest of the army, but it's in theme as well. All right, so now we get to the meat and potatoes of the list, the moment you guys have all been waiting for, the epic 3 units of 9 Windriders with shuriken cannons. So what is there to say about this except this is an absolute blender? I had a conversation with somebody on my Discord a couple weeks ago, dead of night, who ran this against a Custodes player and wiped him off the board. This is an immense amount of firepower, and it forces so many armor saves at -1 against opponents that they can't possibly make them all. And because it's damage 2, every failed save is going to be 2 damage going through. Against things like Alaris Custodians, that is absolutely brutal. You're basically wiping a unit out each and every turn you shoot. And even against tougher targets, Windriders can absolutely shred them if they're on objectives. You're getting rerolls to hit, you're hitting on a 3+, but you have sustained hits 1 and lethal hits, so you're basically just rerolling everything that's not a 6. And you're getting a bunch of auto wounds, but you're also getting a bunch of sustained hits as well, making up for the misses. And of course, you basically are going to wound most tanks on 5s. The toughest tanks you're still wounding on 6s, but again, you're getting all of those lethal hits, so you are getting damage through. But the great thing is this is not all you're relying on, because against those tougher targets, you do have a slew of Bright Lances as well. I talked about the Viper's Bright Lance contributing. You also have 3 Hornets that are contributing their firepower to tough targets. And overall, I just think this list is an absolute blender. Essentially, if I were to give it a name, it would just be Eldar Blender 2024, because that's essentially what it does. It just blends everything that, appears in the midfield. And the other thing is that the Windriders aren't the only thing contributing damage, right? You also have the Farseer Skyrunners, who are also benefiting from rerolls to hit. They are also benefiting from lethal hits with Eldritch Storm. So you're also turning the Farseer Skyrunners into absolute whirlwinds of death. Now, some of you might look at this list and you might take a good hard look at it and say, well, Proxy Hammer, the thing about this list is that, yeah, it does a ton of damage, no doubt. But what about its primary objective game? It's really fragile and it looks like a huge glass cannon. And yes, while that is true, I don't think Eldar have ever really needed to play the primary game as much as a lot of you might think. Now, the reason why a lot of Eldar players got into playing the primary game very heavily in 10th edition, at least in the traditional way, is due to the fact that we had a lot of units in our army that could score primary very easily, and they were very uninteractive units, like Wraithguard, the Wraith Knight for a while, and the Avatar of Cain. But now, since our primary units are less effective, they're not really auto-takes, the true strengths of the Eldar are coming to bear once more. Which, of course, for as long as I can remember, has always been deal as much damage to your opponent as possible, cripple them, so that they can no longer effectively score on primary and secondary objectives. And that's essentially how you outmaneuver your opponent and you win the game. And as an Eldar player, if you're able to outmaneuver your opponent, if you're able to destroy the key elements of your opponent's list that make it work, then you can pretty much have the run of the table and you will find easy success both in primary scoring and secondary scoring alike. And the return to that kind of playstyle as the Eldar has made me extremely happy. I love Wraith units, don't get me wrong, but I am happy that the faster, more aggressive, and skill-oriented types of lists are dominating the competitive scene once more. Okay, so what are my final thoughts on the list? So this list is extremely fast, probably one of the fastest Eldar lists you will ever come across. It's super front-loaded on damage, and it's just chock full of the best synergies the Index has to offer. This list is an absolute Eldari typhoon. It just blends targets into a fine paste. And I really love that fact about the list. It's very high in its damage potential. And while it does initially seem a little bit low on secondary specialists and primary specialists, on second glance, it actually has quite a bit if you include the Vipers, which do have assault weapons, for your secondary specialists. And again, for your primary specialists, you just don't need them. Because again, the main goal of this list is just going to be to remove as many of your opponent's units as possible during the opening turns of the game so that your opponent can't effectively score those primaries. And in turn, you will be able to score those primaries instead. Now, one thing I didn't mention is, 9 Windriders, pretty fragile, but it is just like having 10 Space Marines on an objective. So if there's, not very much of your opponent's army left, in the later stages of the game, Windriders can just sit on those objectives. They have OC2. It's exactly like having 10 Space Marines on that objective. And we all know in the later stages of the game, if your opponent has 10 Space Marines on an objective, that objective is probably pretty safe. Especially if your opponent has taken a brutal beating along with it. Alright, so what does this mean though for Windriders going forward in competitive play? So I think this victory proves that Windriders can be extremely effective in competitive settings, and we will no doubt see more in competitive play going forward. They are arguably the most hard-hitting unit against Marine equivalents in the Index, and can easily hit hard into tougher targets with buffs, and I do think they are the most versatile damage-dealing unit in the entire Index, if not the entire game. And yes, I say that with full chest and with full confidence. I think they are the most versatile damage-dealing unit in the entire game. Or at least one of the, right? And that's saying a lot, because there's a lot of really heavy damage-dealing units out there. And for Windriders to be on that list, to be one of the select few units who can deal a ton of damage to pretty much any target, is just absolutely beautiful. And what that translates to is if you're building a list for competitive play, you're going to a tournament or something like that, you don't know what you're going to go up against, Windriders are always going to be a solid pick and a solid unit to have in your back pocket for any kind of unit removal that you need. Not only that, but I'm going to say this, and you heard it here first, guys. Green Tide is going to be the army to beat going forward. Green Tide looks extremely strong. There's a lot of people winning with it, and the meta is going to have to change and adapt to it. Because quite frankly, there's a lot of lists out there that were very strong before that aren't looking so good into Green Tide anymore. Eldar is still looking pretty good into it, and one of our best tools is, of course, Windriders, especially with Shroudrunner support. Shuriken Cannons being a cool strength 6 means you're wounding Orc boys on a 3+, and even though they do have the 5+ invul save, in the Green Tide, you're doing damage too, so that Feel No Pain is going to be much less effective against Shuriken Cannons. So once it's all said and done and the smoke is cleared, there's not going to be very many Orc boys left in that unit, and you're going to have a huge advantage going forward. So in conclusion, once again, congrats to Shane for doing so well with such an awesome list. And I think you've opened a lot of people's eyes to the power of Windriders. And I have been talking to other players as well who have been, heavily using Windriders in tournaments and doing very well with them in their games. So this definitely isn't just a once-off. I think we're going to see more Windriders, and I'm really excited to see them rise in prominence as they are one of my favorite units. And I think, Saim Hann lists in general are one of my favorite list types as well. And it's definitely cool to see after how bad the Saim Hann craft world was in 9th edition, just to see Windriders just dominate tables once more has been truly a joy and has warmed my heart. All right, everybody, that is going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Let me know your opinion on Windriders in the comments section below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And of course, as always, thank you so much to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last 1.5 years. Your support continues to help the channel grow and has made it so much better. If you do want to join the channel's Patreon, I have free trials activated, which will grant you permanent access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who love talking about strategy, tactics, and of course, hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description below. I'm also an Amazon affiliate and have a channel store page, so if you want to grab some discounted Eldar miniatures on Amazon, or you want to grab some Eldar-inspired apparel on the channel store page, I will leave the links for those in the description also. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.